Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. First, let's focus on how, due to the US constantly playing little tricks, China has resolutely decided to take countermeasures, catching the Trump team completely off guard. Afterwards, they pretended to be innocent. When US Trade Representative Lighthizer was interviewed by Fox News, he claimed that before China recently introduced new regulations on rare earths, they did not inform the US in advance. This so-called act of abusing power took the US by surprise, and China also rejected the US side. He said, "I can tell you we did not receive any notification, and we only learned about this news through public channels, so we quickly contacted the Chinese side hoping to have a phone conversation, but China refused." The Financial Times of the UK then reported on this. Analysts have pointed out that this round of tense, sword-drawn confrontation in China-US relations was entirely caused by the US side, which issued a series of erroneous policy statements in September this year. These acts of suppression against China have not only escalated, but the tense situation has once again proven the low credibility of the Trump administration. The Financial Times pointed out that since the trade truce was reached in Geneva, Switzerland this May, China-US trade relations have generally remained in a state of easing.馮楚成, founding partner of the independent consulting firm Hutong Research, said, "And ever since not long ago, after China and the US held economic and trade talks in Madrid, Spain, it seemed that both sides wanted to avoid an escalation of the situation. However, this trend changed after the US decided in September this year to tighten export controls on Chinese companies. These new regulations are intended to further restrict China's development of advanced semiconductor capabilities. In addition, China has repeatedly opposed the US imposing extra port fees on Chinese-made ships."馮楚成believes that from China's perspective, the US's actions not only substantially escalate tensions, but also once again prove the low credibility of the Trump administration. Wang Dong, executive director of the Center for China and Global People-to-People Exchange at Peking University, said that Trump was caught completely off guard by China's new rare earth regulations. This reflects the long-standing mentality on the US side that they can arbitrarily impose tariffs on China without facing any consequences. He said that at the very least it can be said that there is a deeply ingrained arrogance and self-importance on the US side. He believes that China is now turning the situation around and creating a more balanced stage for major power competition. Huang Erwei, a professor at the School of International Relations at Renmin University of China, pointed out that trade between China and the US is decreasing and is being replaced by exchanges with countries in the Global South and those participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. He believes that China's countermeasures are meant to send a message to the US. They should return to a stable trade relationship and stop playing tricks. As for the current deadlock, the financial consulting firm Global Advisor has predicted 3 possible scenarios. In the worst-case scenario, China will continue to take a tough stance, refuse to compromise with Trump, and would even be happy to see him trigger the US economy with high tariffs before Thanksgiving and Christmas. A senior partner at the company, Bu Xiaopu, said that unless Trump backs down himself, tariffs will be hard to avoid. However, this won't be easy unless he finds a face-saving way out. A relatively optimistic scenario would be for China to agree to purchase Boeing aircraft and soybeans in exchange for the US lowering tariffs, relaxing technology export controls, and acknowledging China's efforts to reduce exports of fentanyl precursors. Given that the US is entering a midterm election year, Trump is eager to support farmers by increasing soybean purchases. Signum Global Advisors believes that an intermediate scenario would be for both China and the US to agree to calmly return to the consensus previously reached in Geneva and London. To summarize simply, several US officials said that before China recently introduced new regulations on rare earths, they were not informed in advance. From another perspective, what the US really means is to blame China for not playing by the rules. To put it bluntly, some American politicians have this view that China has its own set of rules, but in reality, they're just trapped by their own fixed mindset. In their minds, all countries should submit to the US. Only the US is allowed to break the rules, but you can't because they're used to bullying you and don't expect you to be able to fight back. If you think about it, for decades the US has been used to being the sole superpower, always acting dominant, and no country has ever dared to say no to America. Now they're faced with such a strong and resolute China. It looks like American politicians will have to get used to China not playing by the usual rules. In addition, Trump's tactic of forcing other countries to impose tariffs on China has also hit a setback. Mexico is planning to impose a 50% tariff on China and other countries. At the end of last month, China launched a trade investigation against Mexico, and some analysts have pointed out that this is a warning directed at the Mexican side. So, what's the situation? Recently, several members of Mexico's ruling party, the National Regeneration Movement, revealed that the Mexican parliament has already suspended the advancement of the tariff proposal. On October 9th, Mexico's President Sheinbaum stated that Mexico plans to first consult with China and other countries about the tariff issue before moving forward with the legislative process. According to Reuters, Sheinbaum, at the beginning of September, the draft proposal for imposing tariffs was submitted to the House of Representatives. Her National Regeneration Movement party holds an absolute majority of seats, so this? The proposal plans to impose tariffs of up to 50% on automobiles, textiles, clothing, rubber, steel, and other products. Many analysts believe that Mexico is doing this mainly to appease U.S. President Trump. Observers have noted that since the proposal was announced, China, which is Mexico's second largest trading partner after the United States, has already criticized the proposal. They believe this will undermine investor confidence. China has also issued a warning to Mexico, stating that it will take necessary measures to safeguard its own legitimate rights and interests. At a regular press conference, Sheinbaum No. 9 said that the current government is analyzing potential adjustments to the proposed tariff increases. He said, "We are holding talks with several countries to explore whether adjustments can be made to the proposal, which is planned to be submitted to Parliament for approval within this year." Just one day before he made these remarks, Monreal, the leader of the National Regeneration Movement in Mexico's Chamber of Deputies, had already told reporters that the parliament would temporarily halt progress on this bill, with plans to resume related deliberations at the end of November. Monreal said, "We are reviewing this proposal very seriously." Several members of the National Regeneration Movement also told Reuters that the current version of the tariff proposal cannot gain parliamentary approval. This plan will very likely need to be softened, meaning either reducing the tariff increases or narrowing the scope of coverage. However, the specific direction of the amendments is still unclear at this point, and any adjustments could create a gap in Mexico's 2026 government budget because the Mexican Ministry of Finance had previously predicted that the planned tariff increases would bring them an estimated $3.76 billion. This tariff proposal will affect products that Mexico imports from countries that are not its trade agreement partners, including China, South Korea, Indonesia, India, Russia, Thailand, and Turkey. According to the current draft of the tariff proposal, import tariffs on light vehicles will be raised from the current 15% to 20% up to 50%, while tariffs on imported components will be increased from the current 0% to 35%. From 10% up to 50%. Some analysts estimate that the increase in auto tariffs will mainly impact electric vehicles manufactured in China and shipped to Mexico, with BYD and Tesla being the most severely affected. To sum up simply, since the beginning of this year, Mexico has been under continuous pressure from the Trump administration, demanding that they restrict imports of Chinese goods, out of concern that Mexico could become a backdoor for Chinese products to enter the U.S. market. In July this year, Trump even threatened to impose tariffs on Mexican goods. The tariffs were raised as high as 30%, and then a 90-day suspension was announced, which will expire at the end of October. Many viewpoints suggest that this move by Mexico to impose additional tariffs is seen as a response to pressure from the United States, aiming to appease the Trump administration's trade threats. Recently, Trump has been repeatedly urging Mexico to follow the U.S. example and impose tariffs on Chinese imports. China's countermeasures came quickly. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce decided that, starting from September 25, 2025, it will launch an anti-dumping investigation into imported polyvinyl chloride, PVC, originating from Mexico and the United States. This investigation is expected to last for 1 year. On the same day, China also issued an announcement to conduct a trade and investment barrier investigation into Mexico's relevant restrictions involving China. Analysts believe that, depending on the results of the investigation, China may push for bilateral negotiations or escalate the case to include the World Trade Organization. By leveraging multilateral dispute resolution mechanisms, Suishi Qinghua, a researcher at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, commented that launching an anti-dumping investigation against certain Mexican products is a timely and clear warning to Mexico. Mexico's actions are clearly taken under pressure from the United States as it tries to curry favor with the U.S. while ignoring the interests of its second-largest trading partner, China. Xu Tianchen, a senior economist at the Economist Intelligence Unit, pointed out that these two parallel investigations are a typical strategy for China to respond to trade tensions. Firstly, China will not force third-party countries to take sides, but it will retaliate against those countries that openly support the United States at the expense of China's interest. Secondly, China always adopts a responsive approach and will not make the first move. The conclusion is that the era when other countries could benefit from both sides during the US-Soviet rivalry is over, and no one should think there will be no consequences for following the US in suppressing China.